Geeks, the insanity continues. A Florida school photoshopped yearbook photos of 80 girls so that less cleavage was shown. I'm sorry, I didn't realize we were living in Saudi Arabia. It's like we came out of the pandemic and people don't know what's socially acceptable anymore. We got a lot to cover, so please hit that subscribe button below and like this video. Egypt, Qatar, and the UN helped broker a ceasefire last week between Israel and Hamas, bringing 11 days of the deadliest fighting since 2014 to an end. Of course, both sides each claim victory, but I have the final score. You both lost. Most people agree the next conflict is likely around the corner. In fact, 97% of the Glorious Geeks said violence would reignite in the near future, so I'm pretty sure no one won. But to make sure the ceasefire holds, Secretary Blinken went to the region to talk to the Israelis and Palestinians, and Biden announced over $100 million in aid to help Gaza. And I have to share this with you. When Blinken met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, Abbas called him Secretary Clinton. I'm not even kidding. I have a clip from the press conference. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, we would like to welcome Secretary Clinton, who visits us these days. Shout out to my friend and Wall Street Journal reporter Vivian Salama for pointing this out to me. In Blinken's meeting with Israel's prime minister, he reiterated Israel's right to self-defense against Hamas's rockets. And since a lot of people were confused as to why the US didn't hold Israel back more during the conflict, I figured I'd give you an explainer on Hamas that most of the media is missing. Hamas is an extremist terrorist organization. That's not an opinion, by the way. Its behavior meets the internationally accepted legal definition of terrorism. It was founded in 1987, and their original goal was to eliminate the Israeli state through jihad and create an Islamic Palestinian state that would exist where Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza are. A few years ago, they revised their charter, saying they would accept two states with certain conditions, but they will not accept the legitimacy of an Israeli state. They've used suicide bombings and rocket attacks against Israel and against innocent civilians to achieve their political and ideological goals. That's why Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hamas is also democratically elected in Gaza, and so it governs there and provides a number of social services to its citizens. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority governs the West Bank, and since it's so feckless and corrupt, it's allowed Hamas's influence and power to grow. Now, not all Palestinians support Hamas. In fact, a recent poll said that only 40% would support a Hamas-Palestinian president. Still, the current president just postponed elections, and some experts say it's because he's worried he might lose to Hamas. Maybe he should suck a little less. Here's the bottom line. The reason it was tough for the US government to hold Israel back is because ultimately Israel was fighting a terrorist organization that started the fight. Imagine if a terrorist organization across our borders launched rockets at New York and Washington. Even if we were able to deflect a lot of those rockets, how do you think we would respond? I'm not justifying mass destruction or the deaths of innocent civilians, but folks need to understand what Hamas is in order to understand why Israel reacted the way it did and why the US administration didn't hold Israel back. You can support Palestinian rights without supporting Hamas. And I would argue the US government can lean in more on supporting Palestinian human rights, especially if we want to see two states and if we want to stop paying for the destruction caused by this conflict. Blinken's visit to the region didn't kick off long-term peace negotiations, and frankly, neither side has a credible negotiator right now anyway. And while the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is holding, Israel's aggressive behavior toward Palestinians in East Jerusalem has continued. So if I were the US government, I would think about twisting Israel's arm to cool it a bit if we want to have any chance at calming things down and getting to a lasting solution. The most outrageous thing happened this weekend. A Ryanair flight was flying from Greece to Lithuania, and as it flew over Belarus, the Belarusian air traffic control told the pilot that there was a bomb on board and that it needed to land immediately. Then a Belarusian fighter jet escorted the plane down to land in Belarus's capital, Minsk. But the whole thing was a lie. Although Belarus is now trying to give a very sloppy story of what happened, it's clear the plane was forced down so that Belarus could arrest 26-year-old activist and journalist Roman Protasevich, who was on board with his girlfriend on his way home to Lithuania. And while the plane was going down, he pleaded with the flight attendants not to let him out since he would surely face the death penalty. Protasevich is a wanted man by Belarus's repressive government because he co-founded a Telegram channel called Nexta that became super popular around last year's elections and which played a large role in mobilizing opposition protests. As a dissident and an effective communicator, Protasevich poses a double threat to Belarus's brutal dictator Lukashenko, who has been quashing any kind of dissent or peaceful protest, especially since he rigged the presidential elections last summer. But now he literally hijacked an international flight in order to arrest someone. Belarus tried afterward to say that there was an actual bomb threat from Hamas, and they shared an email that was timestamped half an hour after they reached out to the airplane. Did the dog also eat your homework? But Hamas angrily denied it, and this might actually be the one and only time I believe them. So then Belarus updated the accusation and said the bomb threat came from Switzerland. Yeah, you know the Swiss, secretly planting bombs on airplanes in between all that hiking and eating cheese. The reason this is so bad, aside from the obvious like hijacking airplanes to arrest activists and terrifying an entire plane full of people, is that it sets an incredibly dangerous precedent. Can you imagine if other authoritarian governments that hunt down dissidents like China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia start doing the same thing? For now, the EU has come out to announce sanctions against Belarus, and as you know, I love me a good sanction, but they need to be super tough and targeted to hit Lukashenko specifically and his corrupt business dealings, otherwise the guy will have no incentive to change. And that's pretty clear, since even with all the international outrage, he has since signed new laws to further crack down on dissent. If the whole world doesn't come out strong enough on this issue, then it sends a message to dictators around the world that they can pursue state-backed piracy and get away with it. Protests have been roiling across Colombia for the last month, and it doesn't look like they're letting up anytime soon. They started when Colombia's president Iván Duque proposed new taxes to address a deficit that was created because of the pandemic. The taxes would have raised prices on household products like milk, eggs, and meat, as well as gasoline and utilities. And it also would have required people making over $600 a month to declare income tax. It doesn't take a genius to see this as a bad economic plan. So obviously people were outraged, especially unions and politicians, who argued this move would hurt the middle class and the most vulnerable. But things really blew up when Colombia's finance minister, who was behind this genius tax idea, said the price of eggs were half of what they actually cost, which only further highlighted Colombia's stark inequality. So people went on strike and protested across multiple cities in Colombia, which resulted in the president withdrawing the tax proposal and his idiot finance minister resigning. Colombian anti-riot police, though, have used excessive force against protesters. And although the majority of the protests are peaceful, some have turned violent because of gangs, guerrillas, and drug trafficking groups that have taken advantage to instigate violence and rioting. So far, 50 people have been killed, and many around the world and Colombian celebrities have been calling on the government to exercise restraint. The protests continue and are now calling for things like better healthcare, more vaccines, and addressing growing poverty. The reason I'm concerned about these protests is because, as it is, Colombia has a fragile peace due to the existence of these drug mafias, and so the last thing they need is these thugs feeding off instability. President Duque better get control over the situation, listen to his people's needs, and negotiate with key politicians and union leaders before his inaction plunges the country into a permanent state of instability. A former U.S. Army Special Forces officer named Peter Debbins was sentenced to more than 15 years in prison for spying for the Russians. For 15 years, he gathered and delivered defense information to aid the Russian government, which he said he did because of familial loyalty, financial opportunity, and personal grievance against the U.S. Army. His mother came from the Soviet Union, and although he's from Virginia, he described himself as a son of Russia who thought the United States needed to be cut down to size. I'm pretty sure prison is going to cut you down to size. Now, while this guy clearly sucks, the damage he did also highlights major vulnerabilities in our own government security system. Debbins was first recruited by Russian intelligence when he was studying abroad in Russia as a college student. When he went on active duty with the US military 2 years later, he shared details of his deployment with his little Russian friends, who encouraged him to go further in his military career, which he did. Years later, though, he was stripped of his command and his security clearance was suspended because of a misstep. So he was honorably discharged from the military, but then he got pissed. He shared classified information with the Russians along with personal details of some of his team members. He tried to get some jobs in the intelligence community afterward, but kept getting rejected, which you'd think would have been a red flag. But eventually he landed a job as an intelligence contractor analyzing Russian cyber activity for the US Army and Defense Intelligence Agency, and he was again granted a top secret security clearance. The whole thing is insane, because a guy like this should never have been able to get this far or access this kind of information. But ultimately, the worst part is the damage he did to our national security, the security of our people, and to our sources and methods. And for that reason, he's on my shit list this week. In just over 36 hours, 8,000 migrants crossed over from Morocco into Ceuta, which is a Spanish city and territory in North Africa that shares a border with Morocco. The number of migrants is really high for what they're used to, and so there's speculation the Moroccan Border Patrol was deliberately letting migrants pass in. Now, politically, there are issues with migrants crossing over into this area, and Spain and the EU take a pretty tough stance in returning the migrants. And I'm not here to school them about this, since I get it's complicated. But I want to highlight the story of a 20-year-old Spanish volunteer named Luna Reyes, who works with the Red Cross and who was there when these migrants came over. The Red Cross is there to help with migrants who arrive and who are dehydrated or have hypothermia or other issues. And Luna was photographed hugging a Senegalese migrant in a photo that went viral. And it literally broke my heart, because it's a reminder that migrants don't make the dangerous journey they do because it's fun for them, or because they wake up one day and think, hey, you know what, I want to live in Europe and make more money. They leave and go on these dangerous treks because life is that bad where they're coming from, or because their own lives are in danger. And so when I see this Senegalese migrant hug someone who's there to help take care of him, it just reminds you how hard it is for some people and how much that hug means to them. I know we can't accept every single migrant that crosses into our borders, but the compassion that this woman showed for this man, to me, exemplifies the empathy we need to have towards migrants. Now, after this photo went viral, Luna was pummeled online with racist vitriol from members of a far-right Spanish political party, and it got so bad she had to set her social media pages to private. Since when do we live in a world where helping a person in need becomes risky business? Luna is on my crush list this week, and I hope that she continues to help people less fortunate and that others do too. Thanks, Geeks. For those of you loving the cicadas out there, enjoy them for me. Seriously, enjoy them, because I won't. Ugh. Like I needed another biblical event to remind me why the world is upside down. Please hit that subscribe button below and follow My World and Me on Instagram and Twitter. Stay fabulous, Geeks.